Jack Nicholson, perhaps in The Shining, Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs. Not many big movie stars want to portray pure evil. I know we've seen Ethan do this in Sinister before, but what makes Ethan different? You know, what makes him able to put his ego aside to do a role like this?
Well, remember, Ethan wasn't the villain, and he wasn't the monster, rather, I should say,
Right.
in Sinister. He was a bad guy in a lot of ways and got his comeuppance. Ethan even said to me before I gave him the script, he said, I don't really play villains, you know, it's got to be something really special, you know, to do that. I mean, I think that there's, you know, the characters who are memorable villains have really unique, very actor-driven characteristics. You know, the way that Anthony Hopkins speaks in Silence of the Lambs, that script is brilliant, but the way that he speaks, his tone, his intonations, not in the script. That's something that the actor brought to the table. And Ethan did the same thing with The Grabber. I think he understood that the challenge was that the character wears a mask the whole time. But I think Ethan took that as not just a challenge, but an opportunity to let the mask be the scary thing. And it allowed him, I think, to be very truthful in talking in a manner that was unique to this character. And he just really built out a character that wasn't quite like anything I've seen before, you know, and that's what great actors do. You know, he was surprising to me in a lot of the choices that he made, but they were all wonderful.
Thank you.
Hey Scott, my name is Nick from Nova Stream Network in Australia. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for asking. Look, I'm very interested in the screenplay side of things on your end, because obviously The Black Phone is based on Joe Hill's short story, and I'm interested in finding out what yourself and C. Robert Cargill was some of the key elements that you wanted to add into the screenplay, or some key plot points that would expand on Joe's story.
Well, I mean, the main things that we expanded was, you know, in this short story there was one ghost that calls on the phone. We've got 5. And the sister, you know, Gwen. I really felt like and the father, sort of his home life. I felt that we needed a female character to be central in the story, and this 9-year-old girl, Gwen, who I think is an older sister and not much dealt with in the short story, she becomes really the soul of the movie. The expansion of that was I think, really born out of my desire to tell a story that drew on my own childhood. You know, before I had decided to make The Black Phone, I was thinking about making a movie that was really rooted in my own childhood memories, something like An American 400 Blows. You know, I grew up in North Denver, I was 12 in 1978. And, you know, my home life and neighborhood life was was very much what you see on screen. You know, it's sort of working class, blue collar, pretty violent, both in home and out of home environment. And there was a lot of fear of serial killers. Think about that era, and especially in North Denver in 1978. The Manson murders had happened not long before. Ted Bundy had come through Colorado, killed a bunch of women, and then was arrested and escaped in Colorado. You know, Halloween had come out, the movie. And so, and also a personal anecdote, my next door neighbor, my friend who lived next door when I was 9 years old, knocked on my door, and I answered it, and he said, somebody murdered my mom. And his mother had been abducted and raped and wrapped in phone cord and thrown in the local lake. So like the presence of the ominous serial killer who could take you from your bed or take you on the way to school was just a very real thing for those of us, you know, that age in 1978 in North Denver. It just was a real thing, you know. So I think a lot of the desire I had was to tell a story in that environment. And then when I thought about merging it with Joe's short story, which I always thought was a great idea for a horror film, just always thought it was such a unique story. That's really how The Black Phone became what it is, was the merging of those two things.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Hi, Scott. It's Dave Griffiths from Heavy Magazine. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. My question is, I was just wondering, you have some very, very young actors in some very, very intense scenes in this film. How, as a director, do you work with young actors and actresses when they're heading into such an intense scene like we see in this film over and over?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think it starts in the casting process. You know, you've got to find kids capable of doing that. And for me, the vetting process for hiring child actors is also vetting their parents and making sure that these are kids with stable, you know, parents and stable home lives, that they're going to be properly supported. I wouldn't want to put any children through a Hollywood production, or let alone sort of set them loose into the Hollywood landscape as a career if they didn't have good parental support. So that's always important to me. But when it comes then to the shooting process, the first thing I do is I sort of give them forewarning about the scenes that I know are going to be demanding. You know, I talked to Gwendolyn Shaw about the whipping scene quite a few times, and talked to Jeremy Davies about it as well, but just talked about what that was going to be and what she needed to be prepared to do. The same thing with Mason, and the kind of he has a long crying scene when he comes out of the freezer, you know, and told him, you know, you've got to really cry. You've got to really be there emotionally. And I think a lot of it is giving them a little forewarning and creating a safe space for them, you know, so that they can feel like they're safe to go into those places. But I also just talk to them like adults, you know, in terms of the directing. I'm very specific about this is why this is happening. This is what the emotional condition is. These are the kind of things I think this character is feeling and processing in the scene. And in my experience, child actors can handle sophisticated emotional directions as well as adults can. They really understand it. They have big feelings. They understand the things that they feel most of the time. And if you do that and you've really protected them and made them feel safe on set, they'll do amazing things for you, and they're always truthful. You know, the best thing about working with child actors is they're just so truthful in what they represent. You know, the whipping scene in Black Phone is probably the hardest thing to watch, but I also think that probably the most extraordinary acting moment in that whole movie comes from this 9-year-old girl in the back half of that scene. She's just, what she does is so honest and so real and so truthful. And you know, when it was over, she was giggling and having a great time. You know, she's an actress. She's good at that.
Definitely. Thanks for that, Scott.
Sure.
Hi, Scott. It's Jared from Monster Fest in Australia. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you.
My question for you relates to your injecting your own sort of upbringing and childhood trauma into the film, because I understand that the reason you'd left the Doctor Strange project was to concentrate on sort of your own mental health and dealing with that trauma.
That's false. That headline is false. Whoever wrote that.
Really?
Yeah, I never said that. No, I left Doctor Strange over creative differences, like I said.
Right. In relation to the actual script for the Black Phone, how much of your childhood was?
Oh, I mean, my child. It's very much like my childhood. You know, the predominant emotion that I associate with my own childhood is fear. You know, when I think about my own childhood, what I felt primarily was fear. You know, and I felt it partly for the reasons of the things you see on screen, the violence both inside and outside my home. I lived on a block with 13 boys, and I was the youngest. So I got bullied all the time. That was a big part of growing up, too. I was also just a neurotic kid, you know, fledgling artist with a neurotic mind, probably. You know, all those things contributed to a lot of really serious, but there were also some real traumas. There were some things that happened to me that were really traumatic, you know. And I think that around that time, when I was working on Doctor Strange 2, and really in the 2 years before that and shortly after that, I just was in therapy, really dealing with a lot of that. You know, working with a really good therapist and going back and just kind of reckoning with a lot of the roots of why I am the way I am, you know. And that was a very liberating process. That was a really, ultimately, very, really good experience. And so the idea for me in coming out of that was, I thought about trying to make like an American 400 Blows, you know. Truffaut's very autobiographical movie about his own childhood, probably the best child performance I've ever seen. That movie's magical. I didn't think that my childhood was as interesting as his. You know, it wasn't and there wasn't enough in that to make a story by itself. But when I thought about combining it with Joe's short story, I was like, this is a good idea. You know, but it makes it. The film is really personal, you know, and feels really personal, and that's very satisfying, because I think the more personal a storyteller can convey something, it's almost inevitably the more universal it becomes, you know, and the more specific it is to real experiences, the more it tends to speak to people, because people can feel the truth in it, you know. And it's not, I didn't want to make a movie where I was being nostalgic about the era, about the late 70s or the 80s, or I didn't want to try to filter it through other movies and TV shows that we've seen with middle school characters in dealing with the paranormal. Wanted it to feel unique, you know. So that was all drawn from my personal experience, and you know, makes me all the more grateful for it.
Thanks, Scott, for the insight. That's terrific. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hello, Scott. It's Caio from Jovem Pan in Brazil. So you've talked to us like your process of your upbringing and how it mixed with this movie and the script. And how do you mix this with the tense feeling that we feel in the movie and the great performances that we get both from a world-class actor and these kids, as you told us, that you try to bring them to a safe space to act. How do you pick everything up and put together to make this horror movie and still scare the shit out of us?
Well, that's the trick, isn't it? You know, I think I always had a knack for creating suspense and scariness on screen. It's not unlike comedy, you know. I think that you can't really teach somebody how to tell a joke, and you can't really teach somebody how to make a funny scene. You either have a knack for it or you don't. And I think it's kind of similar with suspense and scariness. There's tricks that you can learn, but for the most part, you sort of have a knack for it or you don't. And I think, as is the case for most creative people, the more you get to practice it, the better at it you can get. So there's certain things I've gotten pretty good at regarding suspensefulness and scariness. But in the end, it really the ultimate and most truthful answer to the question you're raising is that the suspense is effective because we care about the characters. You know, I had 26 pages of storytelling that was really about, in the opening of the movie, that was really all about Gwen and Finney's relationship, this brother-sister bond. And I knew that the movie was going to work if I could create a real bond between the two of them, and I knew that it wasn't going to work if I didn't create a real bond between them. If 26 minutes in we cared about these two kids, the way they root for each other, the way they protect each other, it's why the whipping scene was, you know, I was asked by several people to take the whipping scene out, and I was like, no, the whipping scene the movie won't work without it. That's what makes us care about how these two children back each other and take care of each other. And I think that suspense really only works when you care about the jeopardy of the character that's in the scene. You know, what creates suspense is hope and fear. We hope one thing is going to happen. We hope Finney's going to get out. We're afraid he's not going to get out. We're afraid he's going to get victimized like these other kids, you know? And the way you play on that hope and fear only works if we actually care about that kid. And we hope that Gwen's going to rescue him in time. We fear that she's not going to. We only care about that if we care about that relationship. So in the end, it comes down to not trickery or craftsmanship. It comes down to human beings and like human emotions, human characters. And have we gotten actors who are capable and given the opportunity to portray some real humanity on screen, which I think these two kids do. I think they really carry this movie. The greatness of the film is their performances, the humanity of their performances. And then Ethan's on the other side of the spectrum being so villainous and mysteriously wicked.
Thank you, Scott. You nailed this off the park.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Frank from Berlin. You mentioned the personal moment of the film, and I wonder, was that the main reason for you to return to Blumhouse after 10 years? And I wonder, because they have such an interesting output, can you tell us about the difference between doing Sinister then and this film now for them?
I mean, that answer is also going to be really personal, you know. When I made Sinister, I was very much in a place like Ellison Oswalt, like Ethan Hawke's character. I wrote a pretty personally revealing movie then as well. I had just made an event movie that I had made a short. I'd made Emily Rose. It was a big hit. I was, you know, everybody wanted to work with me. And then I made Day the Earth Stood Still, which was a big studio disaster and it wasn't very appreciated. And I was sort of like Ethan's character. I was afraid of losing my status in my workplace, and I was afraid of not making a living and all of that. And I really was trying to deal with the things I was afraid of, because it's really a movie about ambition, you know, and how Ethan's character Ellison was more afraid of losing his financial and mostly his notoriety and status. He was more afraid of losing that than he was about the crazy paranormal things going on in his house, you know. And that's kind of what that movie was about, was trying to reckon with that aspect of my own life at that time. And you know, was in a very different place when I made The Black Phone. And it was having been in therapy for a couple years, dealing with my own childhood, also feeling some joy that I hadn't felt in a long time in my life. You know, there's a lot of love and a lot of hope in The Black Phone. I think it's the most emotional, probably the most hopeful movie I've made. All of that flows out of its relationship and connection to my own personal journey. And I don't think that filmmakers necessarily have to work that way. It just is the way I seem to work well. I think the movies I've made that have connected with audiences have always had a pretty personal connection to me. And the ones that I've done that haven't had so much of that have been the ones that didn't have that. I think that's true. I guess we're done.
No, I think it's my turn. I thought I was just waiting for the moderator. Anyways, Rüdiger from Germany as well. Well, now audiences, one might argue, are getting more and more horror savvy because they have seen like so many films about obsession and possession and serial killers. What does it take, like, to scare actually the audience of the year 2022 effectively, as opposed to, let's say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Is it different actually? Do you need different tricks and techniques?
I mean, I think there's some tricks that have gotten tired. I do think audiences they're harder. It's harder to pull off a jump scare than it used to be, for sure. You know, that's really just craftsmanship, though. But I think that what audiences require now is, in my experience, is some kind of newness. You know, the movies that I see really connecting with audiences have a fresh perspective on something, and I think it's been a lot of more high art directors that have been doing that successfully. I look at Hereditary, you know, or The Witch, which scared the hell out of me. You know, I felt like I was contaminated with evil for a few days after I saw that movie. You know, I think that those guys, you know, It Follows, these are all really interesting, sophisticated art films that are also very, very scary. And I think those are the movies that have had the most influence. And I think on the populist front, audiences, again, looking for an angle or a point of view that we haven't had. In the case of The Black Phone, I think that what's really unique about The Black Phone as a horror film is easy to miss. And it was easy to miss even in the short story, because I don't think I recognized it at first. I just felt like, God, this would make a great movie. And when I asked myself, why do I feel so strongly about this being a good film, I realized, oh, this short story combines a serial killer story with a paranormal ghost story. And I was like, I've never seen that done effectively. You know, it's a very simple thing, but it just did it, and it did it so effortlessly and so effectively, the short story did, that I almost didn't realize that he had combined what are typically two very different horror genres, into one basement, basically. So I think that having a fresh angle on it really matters. I think the era of the North Denver in the late 70s helps with the authenticity of it. So in the end, I think a component of that combined with characters that you care about, it always comes back to that. You can make a very traditional slasher movie without anything being that unique, and if you really care about the characters, you can scare the audience. In the end, that's the most important thing.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that was the last question for this roundtable. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Really good questions. Appreciate it.